They thought I'd roll over, that I'd sign, smile, and let them carve through my land like it was theirs. But when they crossed the line, literally, I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I bought the spring. And when they threw a party on stolen ground, I turned off the water. Let the war begin. When they first came knocking, I didn't see a war coming. Just a clipboard, a fixed smile, and a woman in khakis who introduced herself as Karen West, president of the Silver Hollow Homeowners Association. Said they needed a favor. A small favor, really. Just a slice of my land to run a water line through. Strictly temporary construction, nothing invasive, she promised. It won't interfere with your operations. I've been living on this land since I got out of the Corps. 2 decades, 600 acres of dry-boned Arizona desert, peppered with cacti and the kind of silence most folks would pay good money to escape. I raise goats, fix fences, and keep to myself. I wasn't looking for neighbors. But Karen made it sound like I could help her thirsty suburb avoid a crisis and maybe pocket a few dollars on the side. She offered me a generic access agreement. I told her no way in hell. I'm not stupid. You don't let anyone dig through your property, and not without a contract that's tighter than a badger's backside. So I hired Sandra, my lawyer of 15 years, to draft a bulletproof lease. Narrow corridor, fixed term, fair monthly compensation, full restoration of disturbed land, environmental indemnity, and a clause that said if they touched for anything. Outside the designated trench, the whole deal was void. Karen wasn't thrilled. She called the terms aggressive, said I was acting more like a corporation than a community partner. I just smiled and told her that's exactly how I intend to stay solvent. To my surprise, she signed, grudgingly, said she'd run it by her board, and 2 weeks later a construction crew rolled in with permits and equipment. They kept to the line at first, about 20 feet wide, flagged with orange markers, and I let them work. I even brought out cold water once, trying to show I wasn't just some grumpy land baron guarding his kingdom with a shotgun. Things went fine for the first week, but then I noticed something strange. I'd gone out to check on a fence line near the East Canyon when I saw a new trench, wider than permitted and not, where it was supposed to be. It was maybe 50 yards off the agreed corridor, slicing across a hilltop where I run power to the irrigation well. At first, I thought maybe someone misread the plans. Then I flew my drone over the zone and saw it. A second trench, fresh as fresh gets, with tire tracks from a backhoe running straight across my pasture like they owned the place. I didn't wait. I emailed the HOA, flagged the breach, and filed a formal notice of violation through the county recorder. Sandra sent a letter that same day. Construction is frozen, pending resolution of contract breach. I delivered the freeze order to the crew myself. One guy looked like he wanted to argue, but after I reminded him that my land, my signature, and my fence stood between them in a lawsuit, he backed down. I figured that'd be the end of it. HOA broke the deal, so we'd pause, talk, maybe renegotiate under stricter terms. Then Karen showed up again. No clipboard this time. Just a forced smile and a bottle of wine like we were neighbors and this was just a mix-up over a fence line. She told me it was all a misunderstanding and they'd accidentally overdug because of a GPS issue. She asked me to reconsider, to be flexible, said the community was counting on me. I told her the contract wasn't flexible. I'd already been more than fair. That's when the tone shifted. "You don't want to be that guy, Randall," she said. "The one who holds an entire neighborhood hostage over a patch of dirt." I laughed. "You think I care what your HOA thinks of me? Lady, I've got a goat named after my ex-wife. You think I'm afraid of your PR committee?" She didn't laugh. We stood there, the desert wind blowing between us, the red rock behind me like a wall. She left without another word. But I knew, from the way her jaw clenched, this wasn't over. Not even close. The morning after Karen's failed charm offensive, a polished black SUV rolled up my driveway. A guy stepped out wearing a blazer and loafers that had never seen dirt. He introduced himself as Ethan Wallace, a real estate consultant. His handshake was soft, like he'd never held anything heavier than a latte. He pulled out a folder and laid out papers on my picnic table as if we were in some suburban closing office instead of my ranch under open sky. According to him, this section of my land, the very slice where the pipeline was supposed to run, was economically stagnant, underutilized, and unlikely to appreciate. Then, as if delivering a blessing from the heavens, he slid over an offer. He wanted to buy the parcel, not rent. Buy. And the price? 1/10 of its current market value. I stared at the number, then at him, then back at the number. You realize this wouldn't even cover the fencing that runs across that section, right? I said. He smiled like a man trying to sell a defective product to someone he assumed was too stupid to know better. Land value is subjective, he said. You're better off cashing out now rather than holding on to something that will ultimately be condemned for public use. Ah, there it was. Condemnation? Threat wrapped in a velvet bow? Let me guess, I said. Karen sent you. He chuckled like we were sharing a joke. I represent parties interested in mutual benefit. Mutual would imply I benefit. His smile faltered for the first time. I didn't bother arguing. I folded the papers neatly, walked to the edge of the porch, and held them out. Then I let go. The wind snatched them and scattered them across the gravel. Ethan scrambled after them, cussing under his breath. When he got back in the SUV, I swear I heard him say, "He's going to be a problem." He was right. The following week, the circus arrived. First came the Department of Environmental Quality, checking if my soil was contaminated. Then the Department of Agriculture, wanting to test my feed storage. A county inspector asked if I had permits for water retention structures, which I assume meant my cattle troughs. Each visit came with paperwork noting anonymous complaints. Anonymous, my ass. One afternoon, the inspector from the DEQ stood on my land looking uncomfortable and confided quietly. Off the record? Someone is filing complaints daily. Same language. Someone wants us to find something. And just like that, the pattern became obvious. Karen couldn't get what she wanted through paperwork, so she switched to pressure. The next time she showed up, she didn't bother with wine. She stood on the porch with crossed arms, flanked by 2 HOA board members wearing matching shirts like a cult that coordinated via spreadsheet. "You're being unreasonable," she said. "This could all be over if you simply transfer that land." I leaned against my truck. "We have a signed lease. Follow it." "But the community needs this," she insisted. "We have families who—" "You have a contract. You can't honestly value dirt more than people." "Oh, I value people," I said. "I just don't value you." Her face went tight. One of the board members whispered something and they walked back to their SUV like they owned the world. The very next day, construction resumed, not where the contract allowed, but deeper onto my property. They didn't ask. They didn't notify. They just started digging. Sandra drafted a formal cease and desist, citing breach of contract, and filed an injunction request with the county court. I served the documents myself, handed them right to the foreman. He read them, swallowed hard, and shut his equipment down. I thought that would be the end of the escalation. But people like Karen don't stop when they're in the wrong. They double down. She didn't want a deal anymore. She wanted to win. I wasn't surprised when I saw dust rising on the horizon again, but I was surprised when the trucks didn't stop at the edge of the permitted corridor. They rolled straight past the markers, past the fences, and into the section I'd explicitly forbidden in the contract. Backhoes lowered their buckets like executioners preparing for work. I marched down there with a copy of the injunction in one hand and my phone recording in the other. Before I could open my mouth, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up behind me, and then a second truck, this one shiny and white, with the words, Silver Hollow HOA, Authorized Development. Magneted to the side, Karen stepped out wearing aviators and holding a folder stuffed with paperwork. "Good morning, Randall," she said like we were meeting for brunch. "The hell you think you're doing?" She held out the folder as if handing me a menu. "Construction is proceeding under emergency authorization. Here's the court order." The sheriff nodded like he'd already been briefed. I took the paperwork. The signatures were neat, the letterhead official looking. But something was off. My eyes scanned down the page and there it was, a signed addendum granting us expanded access to my land. Signed by me. Only problem, I had never seen it in my life. My signature looked like someone traced it from a DMV form and prayed no one checked closely. "This is fake," I said. Karen shrugged. "The county approved it." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Sir, according to this order, you've already consented to the change. I didn't sign it. You'll need to take that up with the judge," he said. But his tone told me he didn't plan on getting between a HOA and whatever machine had oiled its gears. I scanned the document again. The parcel number was correct, the notary seal looked real, and the court stamp, hell, I couldn't tell. They'd filed something somewhere and gamed the system. It hit me like a punch to the chest. They hadn't just violated the contract. They had fabricated legal consent. Construction roared back to life. Excavators chewed into the soil as if the land were theirs. I walked back toward the house, adrenaline buzzing so loud in my ears I could barely think. When I reached the porch, I called Sandra. They forged my signature. She didn't even curse, which was worse than yelling. "Screen it, scan it, send it to me, and document everything. Don't interfere. Let them hang themselves." That night I sat at my desk with a magnifying lamp and compared my signature on the original contract to the one on the addendum. Mine leaned slightly right, looping in a single gesture. The one on the addendum looked like someone copied it stroke by shaky stroke, the way a child draws a horse having only ever seen a vague photograph. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd roll over and let them take my land because they showed me a sheet of paper. They didn't understand that I spent 8 years in the Marines learning to spot fake intel by the weight of the paper. I started digging deeper into the project. Not the trench. The on-paper trail. HOA filings, environmental impact forms, procurement agreements. That's when I found the gem, a line item showing an anticipated water supply acquisition. From a source several miles north of my ranch, a privately owned spring I'd heard of years ago. I looked up the current owner, a retired hydrologist living in Colorado, and according to the county website, the water source was listed for sale. My hands froze on the mouse. For a long moment, I just stared at the listing. If they got that spring, they could claim eminent domain for the pipeline route. If I got it, the pipeline would lead nowhere unless I allowed it. I dialed the number on the listing. A man answered in a calm, dusty voice. "Yes," he said, "I am selling it. Yes, the water rights transfer. No, the HOA hasn't bought it yet." "How much?" He named a number. It wouldn't bankrupt me, but it wasn't pocket change. I didn't hesitate. "I'll take it," I said. He chuckled. "Don't you want to see it first?" "I've seen enough to know what I'm buying." We finalized everything by the end of the day. I processed the wire transfer through my bank and confirmed the paperwork with Sandra. Just like that, the HOA's entire plan, every inch of trench, every dollar spent, every forged document, became worthless without my permission to access the spring. I walked out onto my porch, listening to the distant hum of machinery chewing at land that was mine. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry. I felt calm. Let them dig. Let them build. Every foot of pipe they laid now was into a dead end. They wanted war. Fine. But I was done playing defense. I didn't say a damn word. Not to the sheriff, not to the HOA, not to the construction crew now crisscrossing my property like ants with pipe segments on their backs. I let them keep going. Let Karen strut around with her clipboard and power vest like she'd just claimed the Oregon Trail. She had no idea. Every morning I walked the perimeter with my coffee in hand and a GoPro strapped to my hat. I recorded everything. Every trench, every marker they moved, every bulldozer that rumbled past the boundary lines. Sometimes I'd wave at the workers, sometimes they'd wave back like we were all neighbors building a treehouse instead of a multi-million-dollar breach of contract. The day they erected the pump station was the day I knew the time was almost right. They didn't ask permission for that either. Just poured concrete like they were building on county land, not the private ranch of a man who still had the original Spanish land grant framed above his fireplace. It was positioned about 200 yards past the permitted corridor, near an arroyo that only fills during heavy rain. Not ideal terrain, but evidently they thought the risk was worth it. The cherry on top came 2 days later, an email from the HOA addressed to Mr. Brown, not Randall, not Randy, just Mr. Brown. Formal, cold, like a billing notice. It informed me that a community celebration would take place that weekend to commemorate the successful installation of the Silver Hollow water access line. I was invited to attend as a valued land partner. I nearly choked on my coffee. They weren't just trespassing, they were throwing a damn party on stolen land. The day of the event, I watched from my porch as they set up a stage, speakers, banners. A catering truck pulled in. Balloons bobbed in the wind like colorful middle fingers. Kids ran through the weeds, tripping over orange flags they didn't realize marked an active dispute. HOA board members posed for selfies next to the control panel for a system they didn't own, linked to a source they hadn't yet discovered was mine. Karen stood at the podium and made a speech. I couldn't hear all of it from where I stood, but I caught a few lines carried by the wind. An example of progress overcoming obstacles. Cooperation triumphs over selfish interests. Community first. I almost applauded, but I waited. That night, after the champagne had dried and the stage lights went dark, I climbed into my truck and drove the dirt road north. The spring sat quiet beneath moonlight, the control valve housed in a modest shed reinforced with a brand new lock. My lock. The access panel still smelled of fresh wiring. I ran my hand along the cold pipe. Everything was in place. I turned the valve. Not all the way. I wasn't looking to damage anything. Just enough to shut down flow. Enough to remind them that every drop of water they thought they controlled still passed through my fingers first. By the time I drove back, the party tents were already being disassembled. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning started with sirens. Not emergency, just chaos. A dozen frantic HOA residents crowded at the pump station. I sipped my coffee on the porch and watched as Karen shouted into a walkie-talkie, flanked by 2 panicking interns trying to pull readings from a dead console. Someone in khakis kicked the base of the pump and cursed. No water, no pressure, no clue. Karen got into her SUV and peeled out toward my house. I stayed put, arms crossed, waiting. She didn't knock. She just marched up onto the porch, fists clenched. "You shut it off," she hissed. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Did I? "You're playing a dangerous game, Randall. We have families, children. You have a contract and you broke it." She stepped closer, eyes burning. "We will sue." Already filed my own. Good luck beating me to court. I swear to God, if you don't turn that water back on. I raised a folder. This is a copy of the deed. Water rights, source location, usage restrictions. You want water, Karen? You'll lease it from me, or you'll go thirsty. Her face went pale, not white, pale like the blood was draining to fuel her rage. You can't do this. I already did. She turned, muttering something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like psychopath. I didn't mind. I'd been called worse. Back inside, I sat at my desk and uploaded the footage from the past 2 weeks. Construction violations, property trespass, her speech, the celebration, the final nail in the coffin. Sandra would love this. By sunrise, Silver Hollow had turned into a desert-themed sitcom. Sprinklers coughed air. Faucets whined like old dogs. The HOA Facebook page exploded with posts. Is anyone else's water out? Emergency boil notice? Do we still pay full HOA dues if there's no water? Someone even posted a blurry video of Karen pacing in front of the clubhouse with the caption, Queen of the Dust Bowl. I took a long, slow sip of my coffee and admired the silence. Then came the knocks, loud, insistent. Sandra had warned me that the HOA wouldn't take this lying down. She was right. By 9, I had 3 visitors. First, a local news reporter with a feel-good neighborhood segment who smelled scandal and wanted to know why a local landowner cut off water to innocent families. I handed her a 1-page press release and a flash drive. On it, video of the illegal construction, GPS overlays of the trespass, and a notarized copy of the deed to the spring. She blinked more with every slide. By the end, she shook my hand, thanked me, and said she needed to speak to legal before airing anything. Second, a representative from the county water board, clipboard in hand, overwhelmed and sweating. He was polite, I'll give him that. Told me that HOA management had claimed I was sabotaging infrastructure. I calmly walked him through the legal chain of ownership, the spring, the pipe, the lease violations. He took notes, a lot of them. Third came Karen. This time she brought backup, a sharp-suited attorney from some overpriced Phoenix firm. He didn't introduce himself, just handed me a court notice. The HOA was suing me for willful sabotage of public infrastructure, interference with municipal utility access, and economic harm to a registered residential community. I almost laughed. You claiming you're a municipality now? Karen didn't smile. You're destroying people's lives. I handed the lawyer my own envelope. Countersuit filed this morning. Fraud, criminal trespass, forgery, illegal use of private resources, and property damage. He opened it, scanned the first page, and frowned. Karen turned red. You're bluffing. Want to bet? I wasn't bluffing. Sandra and I had spent 2 straight nights building the case, every trench dug outside the easement, every unauthorized piece of construction, and most damning of all, the forged addendum with my signature. She'd had it analyzed by a forensic handwriting expert. The report came back, 0% match. We even got the notary on record admitting she'd never met me and had notarized the signature under pressure from community urgency. The HOA attorney began looking less smug. By that afternoon, the court granted a temporary protection order, recognizing that the spring was privately owned and that I had the legal right to restrict access until ownership and trespass issues were resolved. The HOA had no water to no legal leg to stand on. The following 48 hours were chaos. Homeowners lined up outside the clubhouse with empty jugs. The community garden wilted. A local daycare had to close early. Karen made a statement blaming an isolated legal misunderstanding, but that didn't hold. Not when one of her own board members, probably panicking about liability, started leaking emails. Emails that showed Karen knew about the forgery, knew about the unauthorized construction, and worse, had discussed pressuring me into ceding more land by regulatory attrition. By the end of the week, the sheriff's department opened an investigation. A county commissioner went on record stating that if the forgery was confirmed, felony charges were likely. Karen stopped showing up. The HOA board was down to 3 members, all of them looking like they aged a decade in a week. Residents were furious. Rumors of a recall vote were everywhere. They still had no water. Me? I got a thank you basket from one of the residents. No name, just a sticky note that read, "Not all of us agreed with her. Thanks for standing your ground." Inside were cookies, jerky, and a handmade keychain shaped like a water droplet. The grand finale began not with a bang, but with a spreadsheet. Sandra called me early Monday morning. She just received a court-ordered discovery dump from the HOA's legal team, a clumsy attempt at compliance. Most of it was fluff, email chains, budget forecasts, badly scanned PDFs, but buried inside one folder labeled Operations Internal Use Only. She found a tab in a spreadsheet named Water Rights ROI, Return on Investment. They weren't just laying pipe, they were out selling access. The document listed half a dozen external stakeholders, each marked as pre-approved buyers of future water usage credits. Investors from out of state, developers. One name was a shell company tied to a venture capital fund in Nevada. Another had connections to a real estate trust known for flipping HOA neighborhoods into rental properties. Karen hadn't built the pipeline just for Silver Hollow. She'd built it to turn my water into a long-term profit machine. Sandra nearly dropped her coffee. This isn't just civil fraud, Randall. This is RICO territory. We updated the lawsuit, added counts of wire fraud, racketeering, conspiracy to commit resource theft. By the time the paperwork was filed, it was thick enough to stop a bullet. Meanwhile, the residents of Silver Hollow had reached a boiling point. Someone started a petition to remove Karen and the entire HOA board. A local HOA watchdog group picked up the story. Protest signs went up outside the clubhouse. No more water lies. Fire Karen. Who got paid? I stayed quiet, just watched the implosion from my porch with my coffee and a clean conscience. But Karen? She wasn't done yet. 2 days before the court hearing, she tried to pull a last-minute injunction, claiming my purchase of the spring was fraudulent, citing community dependence and unethical acquisition. Her lawyer tried arguing that the water was implicitly dedicated to public service by virtue of its location and function. Sandra annihilated them in court. She presented the timeline. HOA signs a contract. HOA violates contract. HOA forges a document. HOA constructs without legal access. HOA knowingly continues after warning. HOA attempts to monetize the stolen resource. Then she dropped the hammer. A notarized affidavit from the former spring owner confirming that Karen had approached him with a lowball offer, then tried to pressure him into granting priority flow rights without purchase. He refused. That's when I entered the picture. The judge didn't even blink. The plaintiff, he said, cannot claim public dependency on a resource they illegally accessed, misrepresented, and attempted to profit from under false pretenses. He granted full injunctive relief in my favor, upheld the cease and desist, froze the HOA's bank accounts pending further investigation, and then came the big one. Compensatory damages, $1 million. Payable to me for land violations, unauthorized resource use, and legal costs. The courtroom was silent. Karen sat like a stone, staring straight ahead. One of her board members began quietly sobbing. Sandra leaned over and whispered, "Checkmate." Within 72 hours, the HOA dissolved. Residents voted to disband the board. The management firm pulled out. Karen was arrested on charges of forgery, conspiracy, and attempted fraudulent conveyance of private property. The media had a field day. Headlines read, "Desert HOA drowns in fraud." Water Baron fights back. And my personal favorite, local goat rancher wins $1 million war over stolen spring. I didn't gloat. Okay, maybe a little. The court ordered that the HOA could still purchase water from me if a new entity was formed and complied with strict leasing terms. I set the rate just high enough to hurt, but not enough to punish the residents. They'd been caught in the middle. Most of them didn't even know what Karen had really done, but I made sure they'd never forget it. It was strange, watching it all go still. The trucks were gone. The HOA office windows were dark. The pompous little signs that once said private property, HOA members only, had been taken down or in some cases defaced with spray paint and zip ties. Silver Hollow looked less like a community and more like a ghost town with mortgages. For a while, the residents didn't know what to do. Some stopped waving at me when they drove by. A few looked ashamed. One guy, a young father, I think, stopped his Subaru at my fence and handed me a six-pack and a sheepish grin. "For what it's worth," he said, "we knew she was trouble, just didn't think she'd blow the whole thing up." I nodded. Didn't say much, I didn't need to. About a month after the court decision, I bought the old pump station and the abandoned HOA utility shed at auction. Got them for pennies on the dollar. My lawyer warned me I was wasting money. I told her I had plans. That summer, with some help from local tradesmen, I converted the concrete structure into a little roadside museum. Nothing too flashy. Just a dozen placards, some photo prints, a looping video on a dusty old flat screen. I titled it, "The Unauthorized Pipeline, a Cautionary Tale in 3 Acts." Visitors could read about land rights, contract law, resource theft, and the dangers of letting investment bros play God with someone else's groundwater. One wall featured the full forged document, blown up and annotated with a label that said, "Would you trust this signature?" Next to it, I put a plaque with the quote I live by now. "If you want to lay pipe across someone's land, start with permission, not concrete." The school district even brought a civics class out once. Poor kids looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, but their teacher was thrilled. Said it was the first time they'd seen water rights law come alive. Meanwhile, the new neighborhood association, minus Karen, minus lawyers, minus lies, approached me with a different tone, respectful, cautious. They wanted to know if we could lease water under fair terms. I agreed. The new deal was transparent, properly notarized, and airtight. They paid what it was worth, nothing more, nothing less. I even threw in a few conditions of my own: solar-powered sensors, emergency shut-off rights, and, my favorite, a required annual field trip to the museum for every new HOA board member. It's quiet now. Karen pled guilty to 2 charges, forgery and attempted fraud, and took a deal. 5 years in community service. Word is she's been assigned to maintain parks and storm drains in another county. Poetic justice, if you ask me. Sandra says we made precedent. A case study in how a small property owner can bring a whole machine to its knees with patience, paperwork, and one well-timed valve. As for me, I still wake up before dawn, drink my coffee on the porch, and walk the fence lines like I always did. My goats don't care about lawsuits. The land's still mine and the spring still flows, under my name, under my control. And every time I pass that little museum and see some confused tourist reading the sign, I smile. Because in the end, it wasn't just about water. It was about drawing the line and having the guts to defend it.